Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. This video right here is a continuation of my first video about terrorism in Paris. For those of you who have not seen that first video, I will include a card and you can click on that card and watch the first video. But here I'm going to provide a brief summary of the situation. There were terrorist attacks throughout Paris yesterday. While people were at a concert, a rock and roll concert, just enjoying the music, dancing and having fun with their friends. All of a sudden, shots rang out. All of a sudden, a terrorist pulled out a gun and just started shooting indiscriminately, killing many people, injuring many people. And then you had similar shootings that occurred at two restaurants in different locations in Paris. While people were sitting back, enjoying good company, good food, and good drinks, having fun with their friends and family, all of a sudden shots rang out and people were killed and injured. And while people were at a sporting event in a stadium, near that stadium or in that stadium, an explosion went off and innocent people were injured and killed. The terrorist group ISIS has claimed responsibility for these barbarous, heinous crimes. And that's exactly what these things are, crimes. Horrible crimes, horrific crimes. So right now, the people of Paris and France are in mourning. They are filled with terror and anxiety, suffering and pain. And I identify with that pain. I identify with that suffering. Just as a human being with human emotions, human empathy and sympathy. Because I remember what it was like on 9/11. I remember it almost like it was yesterday. I remember when those planes went into the towers. At the time I was working in Washington, D.C. I remember when the plane went into the Pentagon. While I was in D.C., I remember the sense of fear and anxiety and just sense of terror that I felt. I remember opening, it was either the New York Times or the Washington Post. And I remember seeing the big photographs of people jumping out of the windows of the World Trade Center and plunging to their deaths. I remember it was like it was yesterday. I remember the pain that most people felt on that day. So I identify with the pain and the suffering that the people of Paris and France are feeling right now. And that's natural for any compassionate human being to feel that kind of pain or to sympathize with such a tragic loss. But I've noticed on Facebook, a lot of the pro-black groups that I follow have posted pictures about this whole situation. And one of those pictures really stood out in particular. But before I go into that, I'll discuss some of the other pictures that I saw on Facebook. Many of them basically made a central point, and that was this. They talked about how the plight of African people is ignored by the media. They pointed out how terrorist attacks happen in places like Kenya and Nigeria, and those terrorist attacks do not receive the same type of attention that the terrorist attacks in Paris received. Many of these pictures expressed frustration with the fact that so many black people are not concerned about what happens in Africa or right here in America, but yet they express concern about what happened in Paris. And I understand their point about the lack of media attention. I understand that point well. Because tragedies in Africa do not receive the same level of attention. So that point is a valid point. That point is very valid. And I'll just speak for myself. In terms of terrorism in Africa and just the plight of African people here in America, as people know who follow this channel, they know that I talk about those things. I've talked about terrorism in Nigeria. I've talked about terrorism in Kenya. I constantly talk about police brutality here in America. So this is not a question about me personally, because I don't ignore the problems that African people face worldwide. In fact, I focus on those issues. In fact, many of us focus on those issues. So that's not a question as far as we're concerned. And they also raised the point about how Facebook set up an app so that people could put the French flag on their photographs on YouTube, on their profile pictures on YouTube. And many of these pro-black groups complained about African Americans putting the French flag on their profile pictures, but never putting the red, black, and green flag on their pictures. For me personally, I didn't put on the French flag on my profile. I didn't do that. I have used red, black, and green on my profile picture for quite some time. So this criticism really doesn't apply to me, and it really doesn't apply to a lot of people. But I did put up pictures, like the picture that I used as a thumbnail for my first video in this series. I did put up pictures expressing solidarity with the people of Paris. And I don't make any apologies for doing so. That's what any decent human being would do, is identify with the pain and suffering of others. By putting up pictures saying pray for Paris or Muslims stand with Paris, those statements don't have anything to do with the politics of the French government. They have nothing to do with the history of France. Those types of pictures and sayings are signs of condolences for the people who lost their lives, the innocent people who don't have any control over the government, just ordinary people who were killed, who lost their lives. We have to realize that this is not an Olympics competition that we're in to see who's suffered the most and who's been oppressed the most. That's really not the question here. That's not what we should be focused on. We have to realize that we cannot and we should not become like the oppressor. Much like in the book Animal Farm, how the oppressed animals ended up becoming the oppressors of other animals. We can't adopt the mentality of our oppressor. The oppressor has no compassion for life. The oppressor doesn't value our lives. That's why we use slogans such as Black Lives Matter, because this society doesn't value black lives. So we shouldn't become like the society that we condemn by not valuing other people's lives. And a prime example of what I'm talking about is this picture right here. It says, "Fuck France, Black Lives Matter." This is a idiotic picture to me. It's stupid. How could anyone who's decent, anyone with any kind of compassion, anyone with any kind of empathy, any person that just has any kind of human emotions, how could they put up something like this? Anyone could have been killed over there. Those terrorists don't care nothing about black people. Do you think when those terrorists were indiscriminately shooting into those crowds that they made a distinction between black people and white people, etc.? Of course not. And I'm pretty sure that they didn't even make distinctions between Muslims who were at those restaurants or at those sporting events or at that concert. I wouldn't be surprised if Muslims died as well in those shootings. Those terrorists don't give zero fucks about black people. But you would think that they were some kind of allies or something, the way some of these people are responding to this tragedy. How can you expect people to value black lives if you don't value other people's lives? Other innocent people who lost their lives. We can't expect people to value African lives in Kenya or Nigeria if we turn around and say that those people who lost their lives in Paris, they don't count. Fuck them. We can't have that kind of attitude and actually expect people to value our lives. So those are just my comments. I just find it troubling because pictures like this really undermine everything that Black Lives Matter is supposed to stand for. They undermine the movement. They discredit the movement.